coming in. Well, hello, everyone. I want to welcome everyone for coming in on a Saturday for another Zoom and inside the studio with Dan Winters. This is very exciting, and I am thankful for Wendy Fisk over in our Coast to Coast APA. I guess we go APA Coast to Coast now, which is really exciting in San Diego. So who's put this together? We love running series like this, and it's so important to talk to professionals and get the insight. And I know we have a full house today, so I'm going to hand it right over to Wendy. And once again, I'm Travis, chairman of APA New York, and I'm going to introduce Wendy Fisk right now, who's going to introduce Dan.
Thanks, Travis.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. I am Wendy Fisk, the San Diego director for APA, or American Photographic Artists, and we're really excited to welcome Dan Winters back, live from Austin, spending his day today with us. And thanks so much, Dan, for joining us and for being so generous with your time.
It's my pleasure. I'm happy to see you.
So Dan, I'm just going to say one thing to everybody that's now joining, just because we're getting a bunch of people in here. We do have a Q&A panel. And that Q&A panel is separate from the chat panel. So if you have questions, well, we know Dan has a bunch of questions that you've already sent to us from registration. So if we have time at the end, we're going to field some more questions. If we didn't get to something or we didn't get to your question, throw it into the Q&A panel and we'll monitor that and try and get to those questions at the end. Dan, over to you.
Okay, well, thanks. Thanks for having me. Thanks for showing up. I got a nice list of 25 questions, and I think they're all quality questions, very timely and very topical in many cases. So I thought what I'd do today, I'm at my studio in Austin, and just kind of go through the list. And if there's anything I don't touch on, once we kind of finish up, yeah, like Travis said, if you want to field that question, we'll take a look at that at the end. My favorite question was, how are my bees doing? Bees are doing really well. This is their time of year. And they have a vast variety of flora and fauna to pollinate. So they're very happy, and I appreciated that question. This is a question that I get a lot in some form or another. And I'm not sure I'm really an expert on this, but I will throw my 2 cents in on it. Which form of media would you say yields the most clients? So if I think about my career, I've been a professional photographer for 35 years, a little over 35 years. And at the time, really the only access you really had to your clients was portfolio drop-offs. So you would take a portfolio to a magazine on, let's say, a Tuesday. They all had different drop-off policies. And you'd pick it up on a Thursday, and hopefully you had a note in it so that you would know then that they actually looked at your work if they wrote a little note to you. There was also the mailer, and the mailer now has taken different forms. I know that for a very long time, promo cards were very effective. I knew people that were at the forefront of that in the 80s, and they would keep track. Chris Callis was one of them. He would send out mailer cards, and when he would get jobs, he would talk to his client and ask them how they heard about him, so he could kind of track what cards were doing what. And I think if you were doing an online mailing, virtual mailing, you could do the same thing with that. Instagram certainly is a tool. Instagram is the platform that I use to keep my work out there, and I use it, and I view my Instagram as pretty much exclusively a professional platform, but I do post family stuff periodically and stuff like that. But I think that's probably one of the most relevant. I know a lot of people that have gotten hired off of Instagram, so it's certainly on the radar of people that are giving assignments. When I look at my followers, the majority of my followers, or a large majority of my followers, are in the industry. So I know that, if I put something up, it's going to be seen. And I think that's probably what I could say about that. I'm not sure about numbers, but I would say probably, some kind of digital mailing that's really surgically targeted. I think another mistake people make is they don't look at They don't look at the magazine or the agency that maybe their work fits the best at. We tend to try to saturation bomb, approach way more people than we probably need to be doing. So I used to, for an example, I used to go to the newsstand, and I would sit there and I would look through magazines, and I would find magazines that I felt like my work could live in, and I would target those specifically, very, very specifically, rather than just like out there, put it all out there. So that would be my answer to that question. Dan, you are by now. Dan, are you doing by now your post-production yourself? Or are you hiring digital artists and retouchers? I have had the same retoucher for 13 years. Travis Smith is his name. He works for me when we're working and we're not in the middle of a pandemic. He works for me pretty much every day. And our kind of workflow is that we shoot into Lightroom. We don't shoot into Capture One. We don't shoot into Capture One because I never taught myself Capture One, and I taught myself Lightroom. And so I'm kind of stuck in my ways, even though I get made fun of at times because apparently Capture One is like a better capture system. But what I do is I take the images, I do my edit, I do my color contrast edit, my burning and dodging, any kind of image manipulation stuff that I can do in Lightroom, which the program has actually become a pretty powerful program. So you can actually do a lot in there. And then I hand that file over to Travis, and he takes it into Photoshop and finishes it out. So really precisely, the selections all get really precise. And if there's any cleanup on the face, he takes care of that. And that's pretty much it. And then it gets delivered. So yeah, I'm involved in setting up the look for the image, and then Travis is involved in refining it and doing any kind of actual retouching that there is on the image. How's that coming? Good? Good pace? Okay, good. Do you still find time to do personal work? Excellent question. Yes, that is really honestly one of the most important parts of my being is doing personal work. I'm going to combine the personal work question with another question, which is it's a really good. The gist of the question was, what is the why in your work? What is the why behind your work as a photographer? And the personal work question and the what is the why, person used quotes, behind your work as a photographer question. For me, there are many practices that people embark on, meditation, yoga, running, religious practices, spiritual practices, dietary practices. I chose photography as kind of a practice, and it allows me to have an internal dialogue, and it allows me to understand the way I think about things and the way I think about the world around me. And for me, the idea of creating imagery that's motivated solely by the desire to make images and not an external commission or assignment, I think is incredibly important. There was a great quote by the photographer Robert Frank, and he likened shooting every day to a boxer preparing for a fight. So the idea that you were nimble and that you were seeing precisely and concisely, and you understood your voice. And I think that's a big piece. And I think the cell phone actually has really helped with that. There are a lot of things I shoot as a part of my day that I know I'll probably never use for anything, but it helps me to be involved in that practice. And so if it's a cell phone shot, I just kind of let it be a cell phone shot and don't worry too much about it. But definitely the practice, I think, is having the internal dialogue. I'm going to actually field the question that you texted me because I feel like it relates to this conversation. There was another question that was and that says, coming from a photojournalist background, do you wish you had digital equipment then? And the digital equipment that is now available. So yeah, this is two questions. I'm going to read the second part. With the advances in the iPhone camera technology, coupled with the fast-paced events of our times, do you think it will be possible for professional photojournalists to shoot exclusively with camera phones, especially given that camera phones can be far less obtrusive in certain situations, where discretion would allow a more candid, accurate event capture of the event? So, coming from a photojournalistic background, do I wish I had digital equipment then? Yes. The idea that after 36 exposures, I would have to fumble around and change film, and with my Canon, I can shoot 1,500 frames without messing around with a card. That I can actually switch faster than I could load a roll of film. Yes, and I think of it as what's the best tool for the job. I don't have a romantic connection to film, even though I still enjoy shooting film. Usually medium format stuff of family members and personal things. But the digital platform has been life-changing in many, many ways. And I feel like it's made me a better photographer. I feel like I'm grateful that I had the early experience that I did have shooting film, and a reverence for that practice and for that process. But if we're talking about image making and getting the image, yeah, I do actually wish I did have digital equipment back then. Actually, funny story. In 1988, I was working at the News Chronicle and in Thousand Oaks, California, and the '88 Olympics, Summer Olympics, were in Los Angeles. Or no, they weren't in Los Angeles. They were somewhere. I can't remember where they were. Anyway, we were getting, was it maybe '84? It's irrelevant. Kodak and Nikon paired up, and they came up with a digital camera that was based on a Nikon F3, and it had this big giant hard drive essentially on it, and it made one megapixel captures. And I remember standing at our wire machine with most of the photo staff of the paper, looking at these pictures of like track meets and Olympic events coming through the wire machine, and completely like sloughing it off and joking about how this is never going to work, this is a joke, blah 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 blah. And then cut to today, it's pretty mind-blowing what we have available to us now. As photographers, we're dependent on manufacturers. We've always been dependent on manufacturers. In the very early days, even, there were people making lenses, there were people making dry plates. So we've always been a group of people that has taken technologies that exist and adapted them to our voice or our sensibility. And the digital stuff is a real non-issue for me as far as, its capabilities are amazing. I don't think that I do understand the idea of discretion with an iPhone or with a mobile device camera. I think for me, I would want always to have the highest quality image capture that I could have, and mobile devices don't have anything close to the quality that like a DSLR has, or even some of the little Sony point and shoot camera that's got like a 24 megapixel chip in it. I know it's not a full frame, but that's as discreet as it gets. If the concern is like discretion in making a capture. The iPhone's a great device. It's amazing. I tend to like to create the highest quality image that I possibly can, especially for exhibition, where you can exhibit up in the like 40-inch by 60-inch range. The iPhone's not going to hold up anywhere close to that. It will, you could up-res it like to within an inch of its life, but it's still not going to have that. But I do think rather than an iPhone, maybe one of the little like Sony kind of like mirrorless something like that, which still produces like a pretty darn good file would be probably preferable. There are people out there that are shooting exclusively with iPhones though, so I mean, what do I know? I would try to always opt for quality. Um, you know, I don't think there are many people out there that have said like that have lamented the fact that they've shot something of high quality, but I think there are a lot of people out there that have lamented that they shot something on their iPhone and wish they would have shot it on a platform that had a better camera or was a better camera. We got that. I'll do, what has your experience been like working with galleries? It's been good. I mean, I don't, my sort of gallery work and gallery interactions aren't really a big part of my income. I don't count on it really for my income. I work with a gallery called Fahey Klein Gallery in Hollywood. David Fahey owns the gallery. He runs it with his son Nick, and they have some really great people there. He's very, very knowledgeable. He's one of the few people I can sit and talk to that is sort of a photo historian. I like to think of myself as a photo historian. So working with David is always been a pleasure. I've done 3 solo exhibitions there. I really do enjoy it, and it's a nice little icing on the cake when a print sale comes through. There's a regular kind of flow of print sale, but like it's not. I don't rely on that as my sole source of income. I do like the idea of showing at galleries. I like seeing the work up on the wall. You know, I talked earlier about size. The idea of like running prints up large is really exciting. I don't have room in my house to put up a 40 by 60. Well, actually I have one 40 by 60 print up in my house. It's not of one of my images, but that takes up pretty much an entire wall. And it's nice to see, you know, a group of images up on the wall. It's also nice to work with someone who's very knowledgeable about photographs with regards to curating the show, putting the show together, designing the flow in the gallery, designing the sequencing. That's all been really enjoyable. I showed before that, I showed with Jan Kessner Gallery, which I think Jan's just doing like museum stuff now. She didn't have a public gallery. I showed a few times with her, and yeah, I enjoy it. I do enjoy it. It's been a good experience working with David. He's a pro, so I've had no problems at all with him. I really enjoy his company. So it's always a treat when a show comes up. This question I thought was very interesting. I'm not sure how many people will know what I'm talking about, but someone wrote in and asked if I could talk about my experience at the first Eddie Adams workshop. And for those of you who don't know what the Eddie Adams workshop is, in 1988 or 89, 88 I believe, Eddie Adams, who was a photojournalist, covered the Vietnam War extensively. He made the famous photograph that was one of the images that was responsible for ending the war with regards to swaying public perception of what was going on over there. It's a photograph of the chief of police of Saigon shooting a Viet Cong sort of spy, I guess, in the head on the street. And Eddie had long wanted to put a workshop together that was based on the merits of the photography, not on any kind of financial ability. And so he teamed up with a whole bunch of manufacturers. Nikon was, I think, the principal rep there, and I think continues to be the principal rep, and a lot of lighting manufacturers, Profoto, et cetera, et cetera. And he put together this workshop in upstate New York that would accommodate 100 students, and it was all based on selection. So you submitted 20 images, and based on a jury selection, you were admitted to the workshop. And so I got into the first Eddie Adams workshop. The work I showed was mostly stuff I was doing for the paper at the time. It's mostly photojournalistic stuff. there were several lit portraits because I was really interested in magazine photography and editorial approach to things, and I was kind of transitioning at that point. And it was a life-changing experience. It was absolutely life-changing. It was in upstate New York on the property of his farm, and the barn was sort of the workshop. Central nervous system of the workshop was the old barn, and students went out in groups of 10 with a professional photographer and photo editor, and we were all given assignments. The assignment my group was given was West Point. So we went to West Point for 2 days and shot, and there was great camaraderie among all the students, and the instructors made themselves incredibly available. It's where I met Gregory Heisler and Jay Maisel, and they helped me segue into New York from California, helped me with my kind of transition from LA to New York. But yeah, it was profound. And I think in our lives, we oftentimes will be offered an opportunity that we either respond to or don't, but don't have the wherewithal in that moment to realize the significance of the opportunity. In retrospect, sometimes we can look back and say, I wish I would have done this, or I'm really grateful that I did this. And periodically, when we're in the middle of that opportunity, we realize the significance. And I remember the Eddie Adams workshop experience for me, which was 4 days in upstate New York in 1989, in my early 20s. I realized that this was a significant time for me, and I really was trying to respond with that in mind. And so it was a real gift. The workshop was a gift. I was the opening night speaker for the 20th anniversary of the workshop, and also for the 25th anniversary of the workshop. And I can tell you right now that I got up at the podium to start my talk, and I sobbed for probably a minute. I could not stop crying. It meant so much to me to be there and to know that how significant that initial push was. And we should always be mindful to look for those moments, look for those little moments, and not attach sort of money to them. Attach like, how nourishing could this be? How nourishing could this experience be for me? Because ultimately, that's what's going to feed our path, really. All right, so Eddie Adams, we got that one. I'm going to answer this one now because it kind of maybe bookends nicely about around where we're at. This is what is a practical approach to career longevity? And it's actually a good question, because if you're starting out and you have very few images in your archive, a career can feel like a really daunting task. And I think the way I always approach my career is that every single time I shoot, I do the absolute best job I can. And I try to be as honest with myself as I can about whether or not I'm actually doing the best job that I can. Because phoning it in is not going to get you anywhere. And there are going to be days that are disasters, and there are going to be days that are triumphs. And those little victories and those little sort of failures are what kind of make us what we're composed of, really, honestly, as photographers. I could use you could use a music term, which is, you're only as good as your last record, which is, there's so much truth to that. The idea that you can't rest on your laurels, the idea of, I've arrived, I think, is a myth. I don't think we ever arrive, really. I think we hopefully continue to grow and move towards, a refinement of our sensibility and a refinement of our voice, until we're done, until we stop shooting, until we die. So I think that if you look at a career as one little baby step at a time, which is exactly what it is. I mean, I look back now at the, well over 1 million photographs that I've made in my life, and the many thousands of assignments that I've done in my life. And I remember very, very, very well just learning how to print in a darkroom. And so there's just that progression. And I think the progression just has to be honored. And I think you have to honor every single assignment and every single self-assignment, and understand that it's a part of that process. And that's the best answer I could give to that. I think it's probably the truest one you'll find. What are your considerations around air travel for jobs this year? Well, that is one of the topical kind of COVID questions. I'm going to slide into our little COVID section here. I'm avoiding that at all cost, personally. I believe I'm in a position, fortunately in a position that I'm not desperate to get out there and do any shooting. I've done a few assignments since COVID's happened. I'm doing it. I do illustration as well, so I'm doing an illustration assignment now. Shot a New York Times Magazine job in San Antonio a couple months ago, or about a month ago, I guess. And that was a it was a face mask job, et cetera, but no airfare was required. I think the last thing I shot before the shutdown was a portrait of Bernie Sanders for the New York Times Magazine. And I think I was on 5 or 6 flights within a 48-hour period or a 72-hour period. And then right after that, things got really hot really quickly, to the point where I went and got tested right away, because I thought, my God, I'm the exact person that is in the at-risk category, having just done all that flying. But yeah, nothing. And I'd have to defer to my wife for that. Kath would make that decision probably. But my guess is she'd probably say stay as far away from the airport as possible. There's another question here that I think is important for all of us, and that is, what have you done during COVID to keep creative and creating? And this is one of those questions that I think can be best addressed from the internal dialogue in your internal path, and the idea of developing the way you think about things and the way your sensibility is developing. Because none of the things I just mentioned really have anything to do with assignment work. I think a lot of times we kind of find our way through assignment work. We'll get an assignment and challenge ourselves, or find it challenging, and sort of work through it, and then we've grown. But I think the growth that we experience in doing assignment work, we need to also experience doing self-assignment work and personal work, like I talked about earlier, which I think is the most important. So what I've been doing is I started working on a short film almost 2 years ago, and we shot most of it, and we have a few scenes to shoot. In fact, we were scheduled to finish it up right before the shutdown, and so we had to postpone. But we've got most of it shot, and I've been editing. So it's kind of on a daily basis. Come in, sit down, 2 different people with me, David and Austin, and edit. And that's been a great creative process. And then I've also been looking at book projects that I have, editing for some competitions, things like that. So the idea of keeping your head in the game, even though you're not maybe in the game, if the game is sort of the commercial world. Edit, scan film. One thing that's really amazing to me is make a book, get a template from Blurb, sit down with your images, design a book, hit send. 3 or 4 days later, you get a book. It's amazing. You learn a lot about yourself just in doing that process. So that would be, and I'm not on their payroll. It's just an amazing tool that's out there that I think could be kind of a wonderful experience for people that feel a little bit trapped. I have marks all over this paper. I'm trying to navigate my would you write another book? Yes. I've kind of started on a light book, a book about light. And it's not about lighting as much as it is about kind of light and the history of light and the history of like artificial light. And it's kind of interesting. It'd be a real small one, you know, maybe 50 pages, but it's been fun. And I have that file. So that's something I do every once in a while. Some lighting questions. Your light is so sculptural. What is your process for deciding on your lighting? So I think Greg Heisler sort of made this incredible statement at one point when I saw him speak, and I thought it was like really, really a special, succinct, very succinct moment. And he said, he was talking about the approach, photographic approach to something should be an appropriate response to the assignment at hand. So there's not necessarily one way that we approach something. So I have kind of a lot of different ways I work, and I have lighting setups that I use for certain things and not for other things. And you know, there's very often the term style is applied to photography. You know, what's your style? I really like your style, or whatever it is. And you know, I was actually talking to Greg last week, and there's kind of a joke about style, which Arnold Newman said he felt like style was self-plagiarism. So the idea that you come up with something and then you just keep doing it, so you're essentially plagiarizing yourself, which I actually got a kick out of. And there's a truth to that, you know. But I think the one issue that we deal with as photographers is that we're often hired to do a picture we've already done. So an art director, an agency, someone will see a picture that we've done, maybe it's on our website or in another publication, and say, I want that. And so inherently, we're replicating and repeating ourselves. And that's okay, because I think sometimes we're hired as artists, and I think sometimes we're hired as artisans and as craftsmen. And I have a skill set that's a marketable skill set, and I know that I can do this, this, and this, and I can achieve a certain look and satisfy the requirements of whatever the assignment is at the time. I think you start to die a small death, though, when you start to repeat yourself. There was a Robert Adams quote, which was, can't remember it, but the basic gist of it was, an artist dies a small death when he lapses into formula. And the idea of like finding a place and then just sort of camping out there is not informing your spirit with regards to your photography, but it's also can be short-lived, because you know there's a very fickle nature to the commercial world. And you know, you'll see it over and over and over. You'll see a photographer come up with a really specific, unique looking kind of look, and then it starts getting applied to all these different products. You know, it'll be, there'll be a liquor ad with this thing. There'll be this, there'll be that. An airline will pick it up, and then pretty soon it kind of plays itself out. So the idea of relying on a certain sort of approach is probably not the smartest thing to do. What I tend to favor is that, which I call sensibility. The idea of trying to create a sensibility, trying to create a voice that transcends genres, transcends photographic genres. You know, this voice can be applied to portraiture, it can be applied to scientific photography, whatever it is. And it's the same author is apparent in the work, but it's different subject matter, because as photographers, we're completely dependent on subject matter. We need something in front of us to point our cameras at. We don't conjure from the ether, you know, like a painter has a blank canvas and brings something to life from that canvas. As photographers, we need something in front of us that already exists, and then we're interpreting that. So essentially what we're doing as photographers is we're kind of editing the world around us by photographing it and choosing exactly what we're going to contain or allow within that frame. So to answer the question about the sculptural aspect of the lighting, I mean, I really enjoy lighting. I've spent a lot of time experimenting with lighting. I've spent a lot of time looking at it. I really enjoy looking at a new face and seeing maybe how one approach will work better than another approach with a particular face, or will inform something about the story in a way that maybe another approach doesn't. You know, maybe there's more drama, maybe there's some more painterly lighting, maybe it's more, the lighting has a stronger voice, maybe it's a softer voice, you know. So those are all considerations when choosing sort of lighting approaches. This question is actually, this is a good question. What is your favorite tools? What are your favorite tools mentally and physically to use to approach a subject from the first connection to the final image? So I think I addressed a little bit like the mental approach, the idea of choosing an approach, a technical approach. The other thing we have to think about is we're technicians. You know, ours is a study of art and commerce, and ours is a study of technique and art. And so the idea of we're using tools, we're using technique to communicate. And so the idea of going into the situation with a set sort of like toolbox, which we're limited by what manufacturers provide for us. You know, like I said earlier, you know, we're completely relying on tools that are manufactured to do our job. But the approach from the subject to the first connection with the subject to the final image, I'm gonna answer this question with the idea that you mean a portrait setup. So the idea of the assignment comes in, the dates are set, location is decided upon, whether it's at a outdoor location or it's at a studio or it's at a sitter's house. If it's at a studio, is it going to be a environment that we create, a set? Is it going to be a simple neutral background, a painted background? All those considerations come into play. If it's going to be at someone's house, are we going to rely on the house? We've never seen it. We're going to show up, look around, hopefully find something, potentially bring a studio with us, and just in case we want to go that way. So there's all these considerations and all these variables. And the more I'd say the more variables that we address going into it, the less likely we are to sort of fail. Also, I think the less likely we are to not be able to kind of create the image that works the best for the situation. You know, going back to Greg's thing, the appropriate response. So once that approach is kind of decided upon, getting with the subject, interacting with the subject, I always talk the subject through a shoot. I always want the subject to feel like they're a part of the shoot, not kind of ancillary to the shoot. So the idea that I'm going to do this kind of portrait with this kind of lighting, with this kind of background, and explain all of that and explain what their role is. I feel like that's always a very important part. The more involved we can bring our subject into a shoot, better. And then one thing I do that I think is the most important thing at a shoot with a person is to talk to the person the entire time. Give them direction. Tell them when they're doing the right thing. Slow them down. A lot of times people that are photographed often are using their last 10 photo shoots as a guide for what a photo shoot is. And maybe the way I shoot is going to be different from that. And so I want to explain to them, you know, I'm not going to rely on you to generate stuff. I'll talk you through it. I'll guide you. And I think those kinds of things are really disarming for subjects, because it can feel very awkward to be in front of a camera, especially if it's not something that you're really adept to. Actors are great because they're in front of movie cameras all the time, so they understand that camera subject relationship. But even then, they're used to doing stuff, not just sitting. So just involvement to me is the best way. And then to the final image, you know, after the shoot, do the edit. I usually edit right away because I'm always really curious as to how my edit compares to like an edit a few days later. So I usually sit at the shoot while the guys are packing and do a first pass. Um, I tend to edit backwards because I usually stop shooting when I feel like I have it. So I start at the last image and I go backwards rather than the first image and go forward. Um, and then post and deliver. That's makes, that's probably goes without saying. So, but that was a good question. Another question about lighting, which is I think a valid question. Do you test a lighting setup before a portrait session? I don't specifically test a lighting setup. When we're on location and I'm lighting, I'll have one of my assistants sit in and we'll refine things with the assistant, but I don't do any testing. Back in the day, in the 80s and 90s when I was shooting film, I think maybe there were times when I would set up tests because we were having to wait for labs to process our film, et cetera. But even then I had Polaroids that we would shoot Polaroids. So I was never a real test guy. Um, to be honest, I oftentimes when I go to shoot, I don't really have an idea of how I'm going to light something until we're on set. And then sometimes I'll say, I don't know, I feel like maybe we'll do a grid today with a reflector, or let's do a beauty dish, or let's do a photech and do something soft, or, and I don't usually go into it thinking exactly how I'm going to light it. I have a definite idea of things. And then once the subject gets in, sometimes you scramble and change it because maybe the lighting setup that I, thought I was going to use that would work didn't end up working. So this is the funniest question. How did you become such a badass? I like that one. That's funny. I won't answer that because I don't think I'm a badass. I'm a grateful person that's done a lot of work, but I thought it was a funny question. Who's your favorite photographer? I'm going to list three. So Frederick Sommer, Alfred Stieglitz, and Harry Callahan would probably be my three favorite photographers. I'm very, very, very interested in photo history, and Stieglitz was so important to our practice of photography. He can't go overlooked. And Sommer and Callahan just, you have this idea of what are the limitations of the medium, and Sommer and Callahan both took the medium to places that I'm still to this day baffled by, that they were able to, kind of cultivate the voices that they did within a medium that's been so explored and was so explored at the time they were creating this work. So definitely would recommend looking them up. This will be this is the last one, actually, I think.
Well, I do have some, if you're interested after that.
Some? Okay, yeah.
I do.
Okay. All right, well, I'll answer this. I don't know that I'm an authority on this either. This is a COVID-19 question. How will COVID-19 and the current political, social, and economic context impact what images are made and by whom? I think that's the kind of $24,000 question right now. Certainly, the type of images that are being made are much more journalism images in public spaces. I know that most magazines won't assign stuff because they're worried about liability. And so a lot of people are shooting and pitching stories. There is assigning going on, but it's, we hope it'll open up somewhat. By whom, hard to say. Like I said, photojournalists, it's kind of their time right now. They're doing a lot of really incredible work. And I've seen that trend over the last several years in magazines, that photojournalists have found homes in magazines where maybe 10 years ago there wouldn't be a place for them, just for whatever, that it wasn't in fashion. And so yeah, I don't know, we'll see. I mean, depends kind of about how things go on. The political, social, and economic context. The political context, hard to predict that. The social context, incredibly difficult. I have no idea. I mean, I think we're all kind of like reacting right now. Like we're still in a reactionary space. Um, this thing's happening, and we're kind of just taking the punches as we go, and we're not really sure like what it's going to be like when the dust clears. I think that the best we can do is to just stay open-hearted and open-minded, and without fear, because I think fear is a place we're definitely going to go, with regards to like, well, am I a hireable entity now, or am I going to be marked off the list, or whatever it is? There's going to be a fear involved in all of this. And I think if we can try to not be fearful and just try to kind of breathe, I think we'll all get through this. An administration change would be really helpful, I think, as well, because I think that we would potentially be a little less fearful. But we'll see. I mean, that would be a good answer to that, I think. What questions do we have?
Ready to dive into some of these? Okay, let's
Sure.
do it. So one question we have was, your work has a very distinct palette of hues, saturation levels, and tones. It seems to be part of your visual signature. Did you develop that over time, or is it something you're aware of or really worked on?
So that's a good question. It definitely evolved over time. I look at work that I did 20 years ago, and I see sort of the kernels of the work I'm making now. So there was definitely like a time progression. I also think, I'll give you a good quote by Harry Callahan. Actually, he said, "I take the kind of pictures I like to look at," and I kind of have always loved that quote because, we're ultimately making the pictures for ourselves. And if we are trying to cultivate a voice and satisfy ourselves by making pictures that are aligned with that, we're working towards a sensibility. And so I think the hues and the tones and the post-processing and the environments and all those things are, I look at a portrait of Denzel Washington I did in 1991. So that's nearly, I don't know how long ago it was, 1991, 30 years ago, something like that, or close to. And it feels like a picture I would make now. All the pictures then didn't look like that, but there's that one, and then maybe another one and another one. And basically what it comes down to is it's kind of like sort of revisiting a theme, and how can I take this kind of the context I've created and satisfy my desire today to grow as an artist, but also to satisfy the expectations of the client. And so all those variables are going to come into play as well. I guess it's how we handle them. And if we can surprise ourselves and still sort of stay within our sensibility and our voice, that's a really good day. It's a good photo day.
Yeah. Someone was wondering, how do you take pictures in a bad environment or a bad ambiance? Do you think there is something like a quote bad ambiance at all?
That's one of the best questions, actually, because it's something we encounter a lot. And the best answer I can give you for that is to, if possible, exclude the location from the shoot, like do a tight shot or something, because I have wrestled and wrestled and wrestled, and this goes both ways, by the way. I've wrestled with really bad locations and tried to make them work, sometimes with success and also with failure. But I've also been in incredible locations and totally missed the shot because I was thinking that the location was going to carry the picture and it didn't. So it goes both ways for sure. But yeah, if you're doing a portrait, I would say the best thing to do is, if it's really bad and you're not feeling it and you're struggling, and sometimes stand back and breathe for a second and look at where you're at and just kind of like reset. And sometimes resetting is going to be like a lighting thing, where it's like maybe a tight portrait or something like that, where, you're not trying to rely on the location. But that's a constant struggle for sure. Yeah. That's common, very common.
So the next one, I have to ask it because they were so proper. They said, Mr. Winters, could you describe your process of working with / for clients? Are you offered a design brief, or do your clients allow you the freedom to deliver what you wish to create and for that particular client?
It's a good question. So if I think about, so this is a good exercise. So we're freelancers and we get these phone calls, and the phone call comes from someone who works in an office with other people, who has a boss who has a boss, and they're entrusting you with this problem they have. And if you deliver that and they go to their boss and it goes to their boss and have satisfied those requirements, you'll get hired again. If you don't, you won't. And so that's why I said earlier, it comes down to doing the best job you can every time. Usually there have been, if it's an advertising situation, there are a lot of people that have been involved in the project before you're brought on board. There's a lot of discussion, meetings, potential like dummied up layouts, et cetera, that once they approve on that, and then I'm brought in to solve their problem, right? So it's definitely not going to be something, I'm definitely not going to be an individual who is going to try to take over something that they've been developing. You know, they've entrusted me with this thing. So I want to know, how can I help you? What can I do? What kind of picture can we make that's going to satisfy your requirements? That's going to be a picture that you expect from me, etc. Definitely never been like a my way or the highway kind of photographer. You know, I've always tried to like collaborate. I really enjoy collaborating, and the level of expertise of most of the people that I work with now is inspiring to me. You know, they're like not slouches, you know, like they know the work and they've done good work. And so I really respect that. And so, you know, yes, I'm working from boards oftentimes. Oftentimes the boards are my photos that are used for boards. So they'll reference a certain portrait or this or that and say, we want something like this. Oftentimes there's a point in a shoot where it's like, I've literally heard this from art directors, you know, where it's like, we're good. Do you want to take this anywhere else? And it's like, okay, playtime, you know, maybe we can improve on this. Maybe we can do this or that. And that's always exciting. With magazines, there's usually a conversation with the creative director or with the photo director, one of the deputy photo editors. And the conversation is typically just about approach. You know, we're thinking, you know, an example would be, yeah, Dan, we're thinking about doing a something environmental. The guy has this shop, blah, blah, blah. He works at this place. We'd love to see it. And maybe something tighter for a turn page or something like that. And then I have an idea in my mind, like what they want. And I can certainly fold that into my working method and deliver a picture that's my picture. And it kind of foots the bill for that. So that's how I would answer that question. It's a good question.
Cheers. So this is sort of a two-parter, and depending on the answer to the first part, do you offer workshops?
Do I offer workshops? I have taught, I think, 5 or 6 workshops total. I taught at the Palm Springs workshop last year, and I think the year before that, and then I think I skipped a year and then taught, and then I taught at Santa Fe years ago. But nothing on the horizon. It's the Palm Springs is awesome because it's like it feels like a whole community.
Yeah.
And I really like the way Jeff runs it. And I didn't commit to teaching this year only because I felt like taking a year off. But
Well, it got delayed. I'm sure they're still looking for people. Hopefully it's still September.
It got way delayed, right?
Yeah, so they're trying to hopefully do it in September.
Yeah, which
Yeah.
I don't know if I see that happening either.
Yeah, no, either do I. So we'll skip the second part because they were asking about when can I sign up. So if something comes up, we'll get you the news on that. So many of your iconic images were shot on 4x5 sheet film, which is a rather slow and measured process. Do you think the ability to shoot much more rapidly now because of digital is entirely a good thing?
It's a good question. I actually I actually shot 4x5 super, super fast. Like I could shoot it really fast. And when I needed to, I know. Well, ready load was a big part of that. Ready load changed things
Yeah.
quite a bit. And yeah, I would say that sometimes I have to slow myself down. You know, the thing that slows me down more than anything is we shoot tethered always when we're lighting, and you know, the computer buffer, the camera buffers, the computer doesn't load. You know, it slows it down. So it is a kind of a natural like slow things down. But I definitely tend to not be kind of one of those photographers that's like burning through film or burning it up. I go slow. I watch. You know, when I shoot it, I want to say like, okay, that one worked. That one worked. It's working right now. You know, and then it's kind of being mindful of the arc of a shoot. You know, it's like I always look at a kind of a portrait as like you got the you know, you start, here's your baseline, and you start, you get a little better and get a little better. And I'll always acknowledge to my subject too, like, okay, it's happening right now. It's working right now. Let's all be real mindful. It's working. And then it's like, okay, we got that. And it drops back down. And then next setup or whatever. So that's important too. It's definitely important to know when you're shooting that you got it rather than trying to find it in the edit.
That leads us into the perfect second question here that someone put in. I just love the way they phrase it because none of us are perfect. They said, sorry, Dan, but when have you ever missed the shot?
Oh, plenty of times. Yeah. No, that's the thing, right? It's like, you know, you look at it as, if I use a baseball analogy, right? You always want to get on base, right? So you always at least want to hit a single, and then a double's great. Double's a really good photo day. Triple's exceptionally good photo day, and a home run is rare. You know, I mean, I really mean that. Like, if you think about, I think we too liberally give out, like, we too liberally hand out, it's almost like participation trophies or something, right? It's like Netflix gave this film 98. I'm like, 98? Like, are you kidding me? In the pantheon of cinema, you gave this film 98? So I think we're too liberal with that. So I think that you know, home runs are the ones that are like, you make a contribution to the practice. You know, like if in your lifetime you can make one image that moves the medium forward, like that's pretty darn good. You know. Anyway.
Is there a genre of photography that you would like to try that you haven't?
No, I'm really into doing photogram chemograms. I've been doing them for a number of years now, and that's like my darkroom kind of, you know, I get my darkroom time doing those. The longer I've been doing them, the more I understand how they work and how predictable they are. You know, it seems like an unpredictable kind of pursuit, but you know, you're essentially taking photographic paper, exposing it to light, either with things sitting on the paper or through things that are like that'll transmit light, and then developing in darkroom chemistry, using paint brushes and using sponges and using squeegees and all kinds of things. And that's a genre of photography that I find really fascinating because it's really amorphous, and like every sheet is an adventure. So it's like you get a piece of paper ready, shoot it or expose it, start working with it with the chemicals, and it starts to transform. And it's always an exciting thing for me. So that'd probably be one of them.
I know you sort of answered this with you know, photographers and stuff like that, but what other influencers and what else influenced your work, such as music, literature, current events, cinema? And let's, you know what, I'm going to add just a little caveat to that. Let's go with something current, you know, because you have talked about what's influenced you in the past, but are there any current influences that you have?
That's a harder question for me to answer, only because I haven't really maybe even considered.
It wasn't Tiger King, huh?
No. Tiger King. I actually watched it. Man, I watched all kinds of garbage when I was like, I had my knee replaced, I told you, and I was like laying in bed, sweating, watching like terrible stuff. Okay, I watched some of Charlie's Angels. That's how bad it got. It was really bad. Yeah, it was really bad. And then I got into this watching 70s disaster films.
Oh,
So
yeah.
Earthquake, Towering Inferno,
Towering Inferno.
Airport. It's like, film. I find film incredibly inspiring, and I love, like as filmmakers, I love Spike Jonze. He's probably one of my favorite filmmakers. I mean, I could go back a little ways and say
Yeah.
that I love, Stanley Kubrick is probably one of my favorites. Christopher Guest, obviously, is a great favorite of mine. There's a woman who is called Tatiana Gulenka, and she's a chemogram photogram artist. I think she's in the Bay Area. She's on Instagram, and she does incredible color chemogram photograms. That every time I see those, I'm very inspired. And yeah, I mean, peers, my peers. I'm always inspired by my peers, just to see sort of where they're going. And certainly, I do like seeing a byline that I don't recognize, and then doing a little homework and seeing work and seeing people coming up and kind of finding their voice and stuff is always inspirational. Having done it myself, I used to always have this view, like there's enough work out there for everybody, kind of don't be bitter, sort of. So it inspires me to see that work.
This, I think, is a good question, but I think it's varies from photographer to photographer, and obviously your style is going to be something completely different. So the question was, any advice for communicating with subjects that are not giving you the response you want?
Yeah, I mean, thank God, in my entire career, I've only had a couple, and I mean that, and I knock on wood for that, but a couple of subjects that were difficult. I'm pretty good at reading people because I genuinely like people, and I think you have to be a portrait photographer. I like kind of the human condition, and I like our shared kind of experience, so we're all in a studio together, and we've tasked ourselves with making this picture, and so we're all working toward an end. And usually people that are really professional are the best people to shoot. So people you would almost assume would be problematic, it's the exact opposite. They're there for a job and they want to get the thing done. I have actually had to sort of like have my crew back off and gone up and kind of took a knee and said, is there anything that we're doing that we could be doing differently to make you feel more comfortable? Because I could tell someone was like struggling. And that was in the case of someone that wasn't photographed frequently. And it was just too much, I think that if you're really sincere, I think people can really spot insincerity, and no one wants to feel like an object. They want to feel like a person. So I think the kind of funny, sort of Austin Powers version of, a photographer probably doesn't bode too well with most people. It feels very insincere. I know he was spoofing on fashion, and I think that probably is appropriate for that, or could be appropriate. But if you're doing a connected portrait to someone, they want to feel like you're present for them too. And also, the other thing I would say, in addition, would be that if things start to go wrong and the walls of the studio start falling in, literally, don't let on that it's a problem. Let on that it's just a part of what the shoot's supposed to be, because if you start to lose your set, you're going to lose the whole thing. And the subject's got to feel like you're in control and everything's going smoothly, et cetera, et cetera. So, I have many times actually, if things need to be addressed, it's appropriate to do it when the sitter's not there. So I'll release them. Say like, listen, I got to work through something. Why don't you give me 5 or give me 10? And usually that means going over and getting something to eat or getting coffee. It's not like a big deal, especially if it's an actor, they're used to sitting in their trailers for hours on end, sometimes waiting for shots to be ready. So it's not a big deal, but always be at the helm, I suppose, is a good way to say it.
So I'm going to add a quick second part to that. I too am an absolute lover of cinema. And when you're saying when you're working with a client, do you take just the I am totally upfront in telling you what I want and working with that person. But are some directors do that kind of like, I'm going to make it a little hot in here. I'm going to try and, to add a little tension and get a reaction out of them psychologically. I'm going to play with them to get that. Have you ever used something to your benefit to try and force a reaction or something like that in one of your portraits?
No, like Robert Altman, like
Yeah,
playing like
exactly.
music super loud and yeah,
Yep.
yeah, 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 yeah. No. No, not like that. I've heard those stories though, but like Errol Morris with the what is that thing called, the Screamatron or whatever?
Oh
It's
yeah.
like the
Yeah.
thing, yeah, the TV screen by the camera with his face in it, yelling at the subject. Yeah, no, I don't think so. In fact, usually because of the kind of picture, I usually don't ever have like any kind of ulterior motive. I mean, I know there are photographers that are
Yeah.
pretty underhanded sometimes. I think I've seen photographs by photographers, and I would say like, oh my God, they weren't there to be reverent to that subject. They're not trying to honor that subject. They're trying to like get attention for themselves, and I've never been that guy. So I've always sort of, that decision takes place when I get the assignment. It's like when I make a decision to do the picture, then I'm going to show up and do the picture the best way I can. If I don't like the subject or whatever, I'm not going to show up and try to like underhandedly like underlight someone, or you know what I mean, so that I can sort of like ha ha ha. I'd rather just make the decision going into it like I don't want to do the job. Um, but that is a good question. No, and I don't know a lot of examples of that, but I think Oliver Stone, I heard, did that a lot, and I
Yeah.
know that Robert Altman apparently, like, I'm trying to remember the music, actually the specific music. Someone this just came up that he was playing, and they were playing it like, and Bogdanovich I think did that, where they'd play
Yeah.
it like
Definitely.
full blast and they'd be ready. Okay, roll camera. Okay, cut playback, and then have the actors go into it. So they have that like, they're listening to Slayer for 20 minutes, and then
I'm
they're supposed
so
to
angry.
act.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Form of torture.
So someone wanted you to go in and talk a little more about acknowledging the moment when you're on a shoot. You taught this at Palm Springs the year I was there, and there was many profound pearls of wisdom that you shared. So they wanted you to go into it a little more.
Yeah, the acknowledging the moment for me is that kind of, I briefly did it, talked about it a minute ago, and that is to really pay attention to the making of the photograph, right? I mean, there's just an expectation. If you think about when you were a kid and your mom would shoot like a roll of film, and you'd get the pictures back from the drugstore, and it would be like none of them turned out. They all suck. You're too far away in all of them or whatever. It's like, yeah, we were too far away when you made the picture. Like you weren't looking at the frame and making a determination at that time, like what you wanted as a photograph. And yeah, you're disappointed. So the idea that nothing magical happens between the time that, you press the shutter release and it pops up on your screen. So just be really mindful while you're making it that, and it's the worst feeling, and we've certainly all had it, but that feeling of, doing the entire run and then releasing the subject and then saying, darn, I wish I would have like folded that collar back, or I wish I would have gotten that hair off that left shoulder. So like the more you do it and the more your sort of practice becomes to be mindful of what you're shooting and when you're shooting it and what it's looking like as it's happening. It takes a little longer, but it's worth it. It takes a little longer. But I think definitely the watching the frame while it's happening and getting to the point where you acknowledge like, okay, it's working right now. And telling everyone, even the subject, like, okay, it's working right now. This would be subtle movements. Just here we go. Turn a little bit to the left, chin down, right there, good, hold that, and really like craft it. And then when you release the person, you have the shot. That's why I was saying I like to edit backwards, because I really feel like I kind of go like, okay, we got it, and like stop there and go backwards, and then do the next setup and the next setup, whatever it is.
I know. I think Wendy has a couple questions for you. So
Well, actually, I like this one a lot. It says, let's see here. What was the other one? Oh, Are there any books you'd recommend for a young photographer to read?
Yeah, there are two that I could recommend a young photographer to read. One would be, both are by Robert Adams, and one is Beauty in Photography, and the other one is Why People Photograph.
All right, that's great. And then how are we doing with your time too today, Dan? Are you okay? Because there are definitely some more questions to ask. All right, this one's what next leap in imaging technology are you looking forward to?
It's funny. Before the new Canon platform, the 50 megapixel platform came out, I had a 5D, and I remember looking at some portrait files one day and thinking, I don't really need anything better than this. Like, this is fine with me. Like, if I had to shoot with this the rest of my life, I'd be fine with it. Now, of course, I have the new one, and it's like a lot better. But I don't know. I don't really know what sort of like giant leaps are going to take place. I mean, probably, miniaturization with a really high sort of, as everybody that's listening, I'll state the obvious. The idea that megapixel count doesn't have anything to do with like a dynamic image, right? Which is why like a low megapixel medium format sensor still will outperform like a 35 platform with like the 30 megapixel Hazy is still like better than a 50 megapixel Canon. It's just a dynamic sensor. So what we're seeing is things like 100 megapixel cameras, which I don't know what you need those for. I mean, I do feel like to a degree, sometimes technology gets into a because we can thing. Like we can make that, so therefore you can have it to use it. I do think probably, I don't want to say better sensors in cellular phones, because I mean there are people that shoot like incredible photographs with cell phones. I'm not like down on cell phones. I just personally like, I mean, it's just it's amazing to me the different versions we can the kind of different versions of working method that we can come up with. Like we have all this stuff out there for us. Like how do we make it work? It's almost like ready, set, go. And the history of the medium is such. People have been doing. I mean, we think Photoshop's new thing, and people talk about, oh, you never know how to trust an image. It's like, I mean, Emerson was like making the most insanely complex photo montages, Henry Peach Emerson, in like the 1880s that looked unbelievable, that had tons of elements to them, and they were all comped and they looked unreal, so it's not like a new thing. I think our inability to understand where we've come from really puts us at a deficit. I feel like, and this goes with many, many mediums, but the idea that you have the history of a genre and you have an inability to accurately reference that history because you have a fundamental misunderstanding of the history of the medium you're working in. So when Herb Ritts and Bruce Weber were doing all that work in the 80s with high overhead sunlight, black and white, real contrasty, blah, 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 people thought they'd like invented it. And I was like, well, look at Herbert List, look at Leni Riefenstahl. I mean, there's a whole genre, Golden Globe, and whole genre of people that were working in the 20s that were shooting exactly this way. They looked identical. The photos, especially like the Olympic photos that Herbert List did and Riefenstahl did, looked just like what like Bruce Weber was doing. And I love Bruce Weber and I love Herb Ritts. I love all that work, but it's our inability to like reference it, reference backwards, where we've come from, which is, I guess, why I sort of press photo history as much as I do, because I feel like you're never going to make a real contribution unless you know where you came from, kind of thing. So as far as sort of like leaps in any kind of like camera technology, I mean, I don't know enough about what's out there or what's on the horizon to really speak to that. I guess we all choose the tools that work the best for us, and I'm older and kind of set in my ways a little bit, so I have like certain ways of working that I like to work. But, you know, I'm not sure. I mean, I guess the best way to answer that question is I look forward to seeing what they are. Yeah.
Did you always have the confidence in yourself that you would be successful?
Probably, like, a better term would be naivete, right? So it's like this belief that you could go do this thing. You know, our field is so incredibly competitive. Like, starting out in it would be a very daunting, and even then it was very daunting. I felt like I had a lot of opportunities that I reacted to, that I'm grateful I reacted to, that had the wherewithal within the moment to acknowledge that it was of import. And yeah, I don't know that I ever had an idea of what success was too, which is probably a good thing. Like, I never, Greg Heisler Greg's paying me today for shouting out to him so many times, but he had this really funny thing he said to me one time, a long time ago. He said, oh yeah, magazine photography, you can literally make hundreds and hundreds of dollars, which I thought was so true. It's so true. But um, but the idea of you know, for me, I loved photography so much. I love the medium so much. I love the history of it so much. I loved being in the darkroom. I loved every bit of it, so much that it wasn't really an option. So I think if it's an option, then maybe you do something else, because it's so, you know, this is not a field you get in because you want to make a bunch of money. You know, there's money out there to be made, but it's the big jobs are few and far between. And if you have a love of the medium to the point where it sort of precludes any other kind of career choice, then I would say, yeah, go for it. You'll be fine. You know.
Someone who's talking about your love of photography. Someone wanted to know: do you still have the time to get in and really print your own material in a darkroom now, or is this something that you feel is still important? You're still doing?
So I don't print very often. I have two darkrooms. I do work in the darkroom quite a bit, doing my photogram chemograms in the darkroom, and that's all darkroom stuff. Those are all silver. So that's my kind of darkroom outlet now.
So this is sort of a heavier question, I would think. How can a photographer positively impact communities that they're documenting in tandem with creating images that in all regards are really self-serving and portfolio, you know, getting them future work? So, I mean, they're basically sort of asking here, do you feel like when you're working in some communities that it's okay to create those images and still that you know, you're kind of profiting off these communities? Do you think you're taking advantage of them? How do you work in, I guess they're asking, how do you work with that community to make sure that it's all copacetic and nice, wonderful?
Well, I mean, like, the simple answer to that would be, if there were portraits, just make sure you give them a print. You know, that's like, people love that, you know, like in most people's lifetime, they're never photographed by a professional photographer, you know, and that held true way back in the day too, you know, like the idea of having a tintype made of yourself was pretty slim that you were going to get that in your life. So, you know, you'll get a lot of phone photos made, but, you know, no one prints anymore either, right? Or not no one, but people don't print as much. You know, photographs are shared now. They're shared now virtually. And so the idea of getting a nice print, if you're documenting a event, I'm guessing that the question is hedging the idea that they're photographing like political unrest or societal unrest. Do you get that from that question? Like they're talking about protest photography, stuff like that.
I would assume it's some of that. Obviously, when I was reading the question, it kind of more felt like that's dealing with, I think, more internally as an artist, that you're profiting off of. And I don't think, I think if you're honest, the simple answer is, if you're honest with yourself and trying to do good work, you're not just profiting off of work. So I think it's their own dealing with, how do you deal with, you know, taking a picture that may be, you know, just really making them money, but also how do you deal with that?
Well, there's the whole thing too of like, yeah, what are your motivations? Like, how honest are you being with yourself? I mean, Gene Smith, you know, he was injured really badly in the South Pacific while he was photographing for Life. And when he got back and convalesced, he said he would never do conflict photography because he, once he realized he was using dead bodies as compositional elements.
It's a great
Right?
example.
It's incredible, right? So the idea is, you know, you know, there's the you know, the tourism of despair. You know, I've heard photojournalists referred to in that way on numerous occasions. You know, finding the hot spots, going in there, trying to make a name for themselves. You know, so like, what are the motivations there? Do you care about what's going on in Syria right now, or are you trying to like get with Magnum? Like, I don't know. Like, you're right. Use your own internal barometer, right?
Yep.
Be honest with yourself. Like, what are you doing here? You know, I think that person asking that question, I think that's a great, I think that's a great thing that even got posed, you know, because there's definitely like a concern. But definitely if it comes down to like working in a community that's not your own and you're photographing and maybe building up a portfolio, giving everybody a print is like a great thing, you know, like that's a really kind of a beautiful gift, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. What artist, non-photographer, has most influenced you?
Artist, non-photographer. There's so many. I mean, I love, you know, I love Bacon. He's like my favorite painter. I love Tim Hawkinson. I love my friend Pat Roberts in LA. He's a really good friend of mine. He's awesome. Pat Riot. Uh, Probably like, I would say maybe like Mahalinaj, but he did photography, but he did all kinds of other kinetic things. And Mahalinaj probably would have been a big one. That would be in the 20s and 30s. I really like all the Bauhaus stuff. So like in architecture, like Bauhaus stuff, Gropius, and I really love all that stuff too. I think I'm kind of trapped in like the early part of the 20th century. It's like most of what I love is kind of like the early part of the 20th century.
So we're going to bring it to our last question, which is more just kind of a nice and easy one for you, but I think it's a fun one. Do you have any pre-shoot rituals, evening before, morning of type of stuff? Is there anything that you kind of do religiously before or after a shoot?
I don't religiously do anything, but I have gone into the bathroom and talked myself in the mirror on several occasions and just, you know, kind of like giving myself an affirmation. Like, I know we only have 10 minutes to do this. It's going to be fine. It's going to be good. Let's do this. You know, everything's cool. I do a thing with, I try to do a thing with my assistants on shoots that I know are going to go very fast. Like we did a session with Obama at the White House in 2016, and it was a 5-minute shoot, which I stretched to 10, but even still, and it was 6 setups. And so it was like really well choreographed. We had all 6 setups with tripods and cameras. Everything was set, and it went super smoothly. But I needed extra time, but they were fine. Usually I find that subjects respond really well to preparedness. When you're really, really prepared and they walk in, it's like, okay, this guy is not messing around here, you know? I did a little kind of huddle and just said, like, you know, let's take in the fact that we're in this time and space right now, and this is going to go quick, but let's try to like appreciate where we're at, because it's a unique opportunity, you know. And you know, we didn't like ready break or anything, but it was kind of like, it was kind of that kind of thing, kind of like the Eagles before they would go on stage. Anyway,
I lied. I'm going to sneak one last one in on you,
sure.
just because I think it's a good one for everybody. One thing, if you could go back to your younger photographer self and give yourself a tip, what would that tip be to you?
Younger photographer self, probably, honestly, slow down, because I think that that's learned. I think we learn that, and I think we learn that through failures. I don't think we learn that through victories. I think the slow down thing is like, it's usually accompanied with a lament, and I think if we learn that early on, I think we probably do ourselves a favor.
I can't thank you enough.
That was a good question.
From the bottom of my heart, I want to thank Wendy for putting this together and putting so much hard work into this, and for you sitting here and just really kind of being so honest and spending time answering all these questions. And Wendy, why don't you lead us out with the goodbyes?
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it, Dan. Thanks for being so generous with your time as always, and take care, and thanks again.
You bet. Thank you. It was my pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks, Travis.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.